Yet another Souls-like appears. Well, reappears. The new Valor Mortis trailer just dropped. I played the demo a few months ago, and while there was something there, it had some pretty clear issues. Especially with reading enemy moves and how everything felt a little disjointed in first person. It wasn't bad at all, but it still had a ways to go. Now, after this new trailer and the updates the developers have been sharing, it looks like they've been addressing a lot of those problems directly. You can already see clearer enemy animations, more control in how fights play out, and overall, it just feels less chaotic than before. So, the question now is pretty simple. Did they actually fix the core issues from the demo, or does it just look better on the surface? So, at its core, Valor Mortis is a first-person action RPG with a Souls-like structure. But it doesn't really play like a traditional one. It takes place in this dark, war-torn setting that's heavily inspired by Napoleon-era battlefields. But everything is kind of twisted, with what kind of looks like a pick-your-poison kind of scenario. Not sure if it's a zombie apocalypse or more along the lines of cosmic horror with piles of dead soldiers and undead everywhere. Plague-like mutations, dog-human hybrids. That one's just messed up. And a lot of body horror in the enemy design. You play as a revived soldier named William, moving through these ruined environments where the loop is pretty familiar. You explore and fight through groups of enemies in the hopes of reaching your bonfire. In this case, they're lanterns. And in classic Souls fashion, if you die, you lose your resources and have to go back. Where it starts to feel different is how it handles combat. It seems you're not meant to be slow and methodical like in most Souls games. Here you can dodge, bob, weave, all of that through fights. You got a rapier for quick, precise attacks, a pistol you can use mid-fight, and some kind of ability system layered right on top of that. The biggest difference in the new trailer is how much clearer everything looks during combat. As I said before in the demo, one of the main issues was that enemies were hard to read. Attacks would come out, but in first person it just felt a bit messy. You couldn't always tell what was happening or when to react, really. In this trailer, enemy animations are way more defined. You can actually see wind-ups, swings, and pauses before attacks land. It looks like the parry system has been improved too. You know, any good Souls-like needs to get that down as timing matters and you need to get proper response when you land it. Weapon-wise, the rapier is still the main focus, but now it looks more intentional, let's say, with quicker thrusts and not just random poking. Now, the pistol is being used in between attacks, not as the main weapon, but more like a tool to interrupt or create openings. And that's a bit exciting because I see a little bit of the Bloodborne formula in there. Movement also stands out more here. The grapple hook is used to reposition mid-fight, not just for traversal. You see the player pulling towards enemies or out of danger, which adds a vertical layer you don't usually get in Souls-likes, unless, of course, you've been playing some Sekiro lately. Enemy design is also more noticeable this time around. There's lots of these mutated soldiers with fused armor, exposed flesh, and a really sort of unnatural movement about them. They showed off a new boss called the Orphan, a messed up looking Mr. X with a chest cavity that shoots out acid. They also showed some abilities, what they're calling transmutations. So you get what looks like the usual projectile attacks, some buffs, I'm sure some other Lovecraftian stuff thrown into the mix, so some more variety other than the melee and the gunplay, but also some kind of resource-based system layered on top of that. So overall, they showed things more clearly, which is exactly what the game really needed. One thing that's easy to miss, but is pretty important, is that this doesn't look like an open world game at all. From what they've shown, it's more of an interconnected map. Think something closer to like a Metroidvania style structure. So instead of just moving forward through levels, you'll probably be unlocking abilities and then coming back to earlier areas to access new paths. You know, double jump, phasing through objects, gravity boots or something. I really tend to enjoy these as they really make pacing more enjoyable over time. In the demo though, things sometimes felt a bit loose, like encounters weren't always structured in a way that supported the combat. If they're moving toward a more controlled, interconnected layout, that could really help tighten everything up, especially enemy placement and how you approach fights. It also fits better with the abilities they're showing. If you're getting new movement tools or powers, it makes sense to build a world around that instead of just pushing you forward in a straight line. So while it's not the flashiest part of the trailer, this might end up being one of the most important improvements if they've done it right. Now thinking back then to the first time I tried it, it didn't feel broken or anything like that, just a bit floaty and a bit irresponsive. It definitely didn't feel finished yet. As I said, the first thing that stood out was the combat. On paper, it sounded good, you know, fast weapons, first-person perspectives, pretty good mobility, but once you were actually in fights, it got messy pretty quickly. A lot of the time, enemies would start attacks and you just didn't have a clean read on what they were doing. You'd take damage and not always feel like it was your fault, which is, a problem for this kind of game. Part of that came from the perspective. First person works when everything is really clear and controlled, but here it felt like too much was happening too close to the camera. Enemies would crowd you, animations would overlap, and it became hard to track their timing. The last thing I want to do in a Souls-like is button mash, and before it kind of felt like that. I felt something similar when I played Avowed. Even though the story is complete dog water in that game, the gameplay itself was fine, but very button mashy. It was practically impossible to lose. In this one, losing is part of the fun, so everything needs to work the first time around. That's why controls were another issue I really wanted to be improved. Movement itself felt good, and well, the devs behind Valor Mortis also created Ghost Runner, a really interesting action platformer that came out a few years ago. They even had a sequel recently, but to be honestly, it completely fell off my radar. I remember reading that combat had become a bigger part of the game and that it was just not quite up to par. The same was true for the open beta. When it came to actual combat inputs, it wasn't as tight as it needed to be. There was a bit of friction there, especially when trying to react quickly. The target lock didn't help much either. In a game like this, you need something reliable to keep fights readable, and it just wasn't consistent at all. Combined with the camera, it made certain encounters feel harder than they really should have been. Even so, the demo had a solid foundation. Movement was still fun and engaging, the idea was really interesting, but the core combat loop needed a lot of work. What really surprised me though is how the developers handled that feedback. After the demo, they didn't just go quiet or push bullshit marketing, they actually started posting clips showing changes they were making based on real players' feedback.
Things with combat that we want to make better for the full game.
Number one, combat readability. For some players, they found enemy attacks, especially defensors, hard to read. We are addressing that by improving wind-ups, adding a little bit stronger pre-attack audio cues, and enhancing the distinction between blocks and parries, both visually and in sound. This should make combat feel clearer, more fair, and even more satisfying when you nail this perfect.
And most of those changes were directly tied to the problems people were pointing out. They focused a lot on combat readability. In the clips they shared, enemy animations are more telegraphed, attacks have clearer windups, and there are stronger visual cues so you can tell what's coming. They also talked about controls and input. There's more customization now, better key binding options, and from what they've shown, inputs look more responsive. That's something I can't fully confirm until I play it again, but at least they're addressing it. Now, the target lock system was another thing they specifically mentioned. They've been working on making it more stable, so it doesn't lose track of enemies as easily, especially in tighter spaces. And then there's the camera. This was a big one in the demo. They made adjustments to reduce how disorienting fights feel, especially when multiple enemies are involved. Again, something you really need to feel in-game, but visually, it already looks more controlled in the trailer. The important part here isn't just the changes themselves, it's the fact that they clearly paid attention to what people were saying and responded to it directly. Now, that doesn't guarantee the game will land, but it definitely gives it a better chance. Can you believe that? Devs that listen to their fans, the people that actually buy and play these games? So weird, right? Now, even with all these improvements, the core idea is still risky. A Souls-like depends on clarity. You need to read enemy behavior, understand their pacing, and be able to react at the right moment. Most of those games work because you can see everything around you. First person changes that completely. Your field of view is limited in this game, and what they seem to be doing now is trying to compensate for that. Movement is a lot faster, so you can reposition more easily, and the combat isn't purely melee. Like I said before, you got the pistol, and you got these different abilities that you should be able to find throughout the world. Now, the only question is whether that's enough to bring the whole thing together. A faster, more aggressive take on the genre that keeps attention, but also makes it fun all the way through. The last thing you want are fights that feel unfair or confusing. That's the kind of thing that can push people away pretty quickly. So, it's still something that only really shows up when you're actually playing. Watching it and feeling it are two different things, especially with a first-person game like this. So comparing the demo and the trailer, movement still has speed to it, but it doesn't look as loose. In the demo, it sometimes felt like you were just reacting and hoping it worked. Here, it looks like you're actually making decisions during fights, when to move, when to parry, when to use a pistol. Enemy encounters also look a bit more thought out. Instead of everything blending together, there's more of a rhythm to how fights play out. You can actually follow what's happening instead of just seeing flashes of action here and there. The big question is whether it's all just trailer bait. We all know how marketing can clean things up through camera angles and editing and all of that. But even with that in mind, it still looks like a step up from where it was before. It's just a matter of how much that carries over when you're the one playing. Now, looking at everything together, it feels like they've actually made progress in the areas that really mattered. Before, it was more like the idea made sense, but playing it didn't really back that up. Now, at least from what they're showing, things look more intentional. With fights looking easier to follow, movement not feeling as loose, and there's a bit more control at everything. The setting itself is still doing a lot for it too. That whole plague-infested look with those messed up enemy designs, it really stands out. Like I mentioned, it's clearly taking inspiration from other games. I remember reading some comments mentioning Frenchborn, which, goddamn it, made me tear up about a Bloodborne never getting a remake or a sequel. Damn you, Sony. So yeah, it looks better. Definitely better than what I played, and it's coming out this year in the fall apparently. So I'm back to being interested in it. After the initial demo, I kind of wrote it off as something that had potential but would probably get scrapped or something, and now I think it has some actual promise. They took the feedback seriously and tried to fix the right things. And as usual, of course, because I'm biased towards Soulslikes, I am cautiously optimistic about this new take on the formula. But how about you guys? Now that you've seen the new trailer, do you think this looks like a real improvement, or is it all just a cleaner trailer? And well, that's all from me for now. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Thanks again for watching the whole way through, and have a great one.